This is WPSL Port St. Lucie, the talk of the Treasure Coast.
11:07 at WPSL. Congregation Eitz Chayim in St. Lucie West now presents Ask a Rabbi with Rabbi Shafir Lobb.
Right, and good morning. This is Rabbi Shafir Lobb on a beautiful Friday morning. It's another one of those that some folks like to refer to as Chamber of Commerce weather. It is absolutely gorgeous out there, and enjoying it, seeing all of the flowers and trees putting out their flowers. So very shortly, my hay fever, it's not hay fever. Hay fever's in the fall, but the pollen.
When the hay's dry, right? The pollen, yeah.
Yeah,
very similar, though.
Yeah, definitely to my nose, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the joys of it all, and I'm pleased to see COVID numbers are down. I'm very disheartened by what's happening in Russia and Ukraine.
Oh, yeah.
And very sombering. And, yeah. So for those who don't know from the plant note, the sunflower is the flower of Ukraine.
Yeah.
And
Seen acres and acres of them in the news clips.
Yeah.
Last couple of days.
Yeah. It's a way of at least hopefully communicating some morale and some esprit de corps, as they say.
Speaking of sunflowers, though,
Yes.
are you going to have any at your plant sale?
You know, you never know what we're going to have. We have had sunflowers. We didn't this past week at the plant sale. And, of course, the next plant sale is the fourth Sunday and the Monday after it in March. So that's a little bit of ways. We've got Purim is coming, actually. That was part of what I was going to talk about. Purim is coming on the, I want to say it's the 14th of the 14th of Adar, but Adar 2. We're actually in Adar 2, where the Jewish calendar is a lunar calendar, and so we are in a leap year this year, which means we have an extra month. When you're on a lunar calendar, since it's by phases of the moon, you can't just add a day here and there and keep things on track. You have to add a month. It has to be calculated, right. And so the blending of the two calendars is called intercalation, because you're combining the two calendars and trying to the Jewish calendar, the Chinese calendar, the lunar calendar that they use, that Asia uses, those are older calendars because in ancient days it was certainly easy to see what the phase of the moon was. Everybody saw it. You paid more attention to the sky because we didn't have tablets and all those other wonderful things to distract us. And so people paid more attention to the sky. And you could remember where you were in the scheme of the lunar phase. So month, moon, yeah, they're connected way back when. And Pope Gregory is the one who did the current calendar. At least he's credited with it, I should say.
Is that why we call it
speech, huh?
the Gregorian calendar?
That's why we call it the Gregorian calendar, right?
All right.
Before it was the Julian calendar.
Oh.
And some folks still use the Julian calendar. You see it in food service a lot. Dates are marked on it because people don't know the Julian calendar dates. So it's a semi-secret coding system. Those who know. Those who don't have no clue. And the military uses it too because it's actually easier to code. Back in the day when you didn't have easy communication like you do today. It's worth noting how different things are by the communication systems that we have today. The ancients didn't have landlines. They didn't have TV. Imagine if we were getting the reports of Ukraine by people who saw it, who left to come and tell others, as opposed to holding up their phone and sending us instant live pictures. How different our view would be in the day of just reported. As I was driving in and listening to Stuart Address on Ask a Lawyer, I was thinking about Napoleon when he reported Waterloo and other battles, and how things, when they were reported by word of mouth, by runners, right, or riders, because you could ride a horse or a camel or a donkey and get there a little bit faster, a little more rested than walking. But people actually ran to report news. You know, there was a famous piece out of the American Revolution for the want of a two-penny nail. Right, a nail comes out of a horse's shoe, and it loses the shoe, and therefore the runner is delayed. And that's how you got reinforcements. It's how you got help, backup, and things like that, was by sending out a messenger to come and get help.
And the history books were all written by the winners.
Yes, they were.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, losers tend not to be around to write the books.
Yeah. Okay.
And following victors tend to burn the previous regime's records as well.
Like the libraries of Alexandria?
Yeah, little things like that.
Little things like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Little things. Or run through the countryside and overthrow things like we've seen in recent years as well. So, you know, we are not kind to our history, which is a shame because it makes it harder for us to learn from history. And one of the more... So let's take from that and segue into Purim and Esther, because that holiday is coming up in not very long away. Purim is definitely on the horizon, and it's the craziest holiday on the Jewish calendar. We dress up, we do all kinds of crazy things. It's a topsy-turvy, and you can Google Purim songs on YouTube, and you'll see a whole bunch of very funny routines. The idea that very often a congregation or a group of people will put on something called a Purim spiel, which is just a play act of the story of Esther. Esther is not considered history, it's considered literature. It is a story, a Megillah. The phrase, the whole Megillah gorilla, you know.
Oh, yeah.
Right, Megillah, it just means a story.
Okay.
And so there are a couple of those in Scripture. And why would Scripture have something that's not history and not prophecy and not dictum or any of those things? It's just a story.
It's mere literature.
Yeah, a little bit of literature. Clearly, it communicates something that the ancients felt was essential and vital because it was humans, folks, who decided which books were included in Scripture and which books were not canonized.
Like the Apocrypha. That's a whole set of books that were eliminated.
That's a whole set of... Well, the Apocrypha... The Jewish Scriptures was already closed by the time the Apocrypha were being written down. That's another thing that happens in ancient times, which is that people aren't taking dictation as the events are happening. They're written down sometime later based on memories and recollections. And we know enough now to know that memories and recollections are not always the purest form of anything. And so, yeah, human memory is not perfect, even though some people like to think it is.
Well,
I like to think that my memory is perfect. It's far from it.
in grade school, we did this little exercise where everybody was handed on the front row of desks. Everybody was handed a little note that said something,
And you had to send it back to the back of the room.
And you had to, in your own words, rewrite it down and send it back. And then the next person does the same thing. And by the time it gets to the back of each row, it was funny.
Yeah.
What actually was perceived by those who wrote it down. They
The
didn't
game of telephone. The
Yes.
old game of telephone.
It's like texting, and that's dangerous. So you can't text. There's no sincerity in some of the stuff that we text, because if you use all capitals, they're going to think you're yelling. If you don't use all capitals, then they'll think you're just kind of quietly, passively telling them something. But people get offended majorly over text that they misunderstand because they just type too fast or something.
Text, well, and of course Siri and other autocorrect
That can mess it up
systems.
too.
Oh yeah, yeah. It was. I'm part of a group that's bringing food to an event, and the text was, she wants ginger food. It's like, no, she wants finger food. But I clearly understood it, even though either the fingers or the autocorrect or something changed it to ginger.
Yeah.
And how often, I at least try to read the messages after they're sent, but then it's sometimes trying to get it. Very often I'll use NP for no problem, and it'll autocorrect to no. So somebody will say, is it okay if I blah, blah, blah? And then it comes back as no. And then I have to type problem for the next line, right?
Oh, yeah.
Real quickly.
Just makes it a little bit harder. Just
Yeah.
a few extra.
And if you're rushed and you don't get to do that, or if you're driving and sending the text verbally, you never know how it's going to get through.
Oh, no. Siri, email so-and-so and tell them
Yeah.
such and such.
Yeah.
And
And you can do that hands-free.
It tries to read it back to you. It doesn't always get it right.
And
That's embarrassing.
Yeah. Especially with Hebrew, it definitely doesn't get it right.
Yeah.
It's so right now the system is trying to caption what we're saying. It said something about a vacuum just now.
Really? We didn't even say it.
We didn't even say that word. So
Well,
there's an example.
Now, when you just said vacuum, I wonder if it was correct what they put on there.
Yeah, it did.
I did? Okay.
Yeah, and I can see it now because it's coming up. Thank you. Latency and the delays and all that other good stuff that
A
happens.
slight delay in the delay this morning.
Yeah, there you go. And so, yeah. What can I say? Back to Purim.
Did it say something it shouldn't have?
No, it
Oh,
didn't say
okay.
anything.
All right.
Back to Purim.
Yeah.
Because Purim is the holiday coming up, and it's based on the Book of Esther. I sincerely recommend to people to actually read the Book of Esther
Yeah.
and see what it says, because there's a lot. It's very typical for people to think they know what's written in Scripture because they heard in Sunday school or they heard in a sermon this or that.
They didn't
which,
hear much about Esther. Not in Sunday school. We
Right.
were too young to understand what was going on.
And that's true. Esther is definitely an X-rated book. Very much an X-rated book. I know that last week I commented about somebody having asked me if Esther was the epitome of a bride Jewishly, and the answer is no way, not even close. And but it's an interesting story. She, of course, is selected among all of the virgins. The story is beyond credible for anybody who actually reads it to be a factual story. And I love the people who try to figure out who is Queen Esther in history and who is King Ahasuerus. Was it Xerxes? I don't know. It doesn't really matter. That's not the point of the story, is who was being talked about. The lavish kings that were prevalent in the area are the target, clearly. And it's, whoever Ahasuerus really was meant to be was clearly not a good king. Rather than ruling his country and dealing with the administrative needs, which is what a ruler should be doing, she said, he instead is having drinking parties and lavish extravaganzas. And the first one in the book is 180 days long. Now, it doesn't take rocket science to know that 180 days is a half a year. Yeah. Right? It's actually a little bit more, because they don't have 30-month days. They do 29, 30. Yeah, so it's approximately 6 months. Yeah, definitely not 31-day months are not yet in vogue because the Greek calendar hasn't yet come in. So they're using a lunar calendar. So it's 6 months of partying, and then there's another week of partying after that, and all the time that the king is having this drinking, and it's clear that it's a drinking party. It's a mishtah, a drinking party. And the queen is having one over in the palace for women as well.
Oh.
Yeah, so, you just have to read about it. And here's the other piece, folks. There are at least 4 or 5 genders spoken of in the Book of Esther.
Really?
Yeah.
We were gender aware back then?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
We were much more open about gender back then
Oh.
than we are now. And and so that brings up another point, which I'll digress and then come back to Purim, which is that there's a number of words that are often used interchangeably but shouldn't be. Sex is your XY or XX chromosomal reality. Perhaps the way your body produces the the reproduction organs. Gender is according to the roles and the identity. It's an identity. It's not biology. Gender is identity. So that's more psychological, if you will, sociological. And then there's orientation. Orientation is getting back toward biology. It's what alerts your body, what arouses you sexually. That's your orientation. And the three are not highly interconnected. They're related, but they're not you can be any option in any of those parameters. And then there's gender expression, which is how do you dress, how do you present yourself. So there's all different kinds of things in there. And when I teach it in my class, because it comes up in particularly in the psychology, we have a unit on LGBTQ and identity and all of that. They are different words, and it's important to use them correctly. We don't in common speech. We tend to blend them and use them erroneously.
Great description.
Yeah. What can I say?
Yeah.
There is something out there, you can Google it, called the gender bread. Not ginger, but gender bread.
Gender bread.
The gender bread being, and it explains some of these things a little, with some good clarity, and it's pretty easy. It looks like a cookie, and it explains the parts of the cookie. So, that's a clean way to have the discussion,
Yeah,
and it should be.
Yeah. I think I know what you're talking about.
Yeah,
I think
gender
I've
bread.
seen some ones.
Yeah, it talks about what's male, female, what's masculine, female, that sort of thing, and how do you express yourself. And one of the examples that I use in class was of a gentleman that worked for my mom in her jewelry shop, and his name was Jason, and way back when. Jason was very clearly male, had a beard, and yet he thoroughly enjoyed a certain style of feminine clothing.
Ew.
And
Like
no,
the
it
Scotsman.
wasn't new at all. He was
it?
very nicely dressed. He was very clean. He was actually a very attractive looking woman. He was a drag queen contestant.
Oh, okay.
And and he did his work well, and nobody really cared. I guess that's the bottom line of it. It was just the thing that he enjoyed, and he looked good in the clothes. The clothes were properly fitted to him, and his hair was long, and so was his beard. So there was no.
There's nothing feminine about a long beard.
There's nothing feminine about a long beard, and if he had wanted to pretend, then he probably would have shaved it. I don't know. I never asked. And it wasn't really any of my business. My business was whether or not he came to work when he was supposed to, if he did the work he was supposed to do, and if the work was good quality, which it was. And that's what mattered. So, done,
They weren't
finished.
concerned about physical alterations like they do today. But then.
Oh, I think people were very rude to him in public.
Oh.
That's a societal problem.
Ah.
That's a societal problem. It's nobody else's business
Yeah.
what somebody does and what.
Yeah.
As long as you're not hurting somebody, folks, stop worrying about what somebody else is doing and whether or not they're conforming to your ideas.
What I see a lot of was if people don't really know somebody, they'll spread any gossip they hear about them because they're desperate for some information because they don't know. They're not a friend with the person. They don't associate with the person. So the only information that they've got is something that they make up. That's where gossip comes from. There's too much of that.
Well, some of it's that telephone game, too, that you were talking about before. People repeat things, but they don't repeat them well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And you're right. People who like to gossip want to be seen as the center of all knowledge.
Yep.
And
Now, who's that sound like?
we're not going to name any names, Cliff.
No. We don't need to do that. We know.
And and it's not helpful, right? Bible actually says that one of the worst things you can do is be a gossip.
Well, yeah, because for one, it's not true information; it's false information. Because most of the time, you're looking at everybody as sinners, so you can't imagine them being good. So you can imagine what they're doing, and then telling everybody. That's what's wrong about gossip, because you're telling people stuff as if it were a fact, and you don't know for sure if it's a fact or not. You don't know. So stop gossiping. Wonderful.
Okay, so, and you're right. Some people do look at others as sinners. That I have to confess that is one of the big differences between Judaism and some Christianities. It was really brought home to me when I was a chaplain at a hospital, and I was going through the CPE, clinical pastoral education, that you need to go through to be a chaplain, that you should go through to be a chaplain. It's required at many hospitals. And so I've done 4 units of that certification. And this particular one, it was a group of seminarians, so students who were going for ordination in a variety of different traditions. And we were each invited one day to do morning prayer for the class in our tradition. And so, I had prepared the Jewish one and used it. And most of what we do as Jews, we're invited to wake up. The very first thing we're supposed to think of, aside from God's unity, is thank you. Moda ani, or moda ani if you're feminine. Lifanecha, how grateful I am before you, God, that you have given me this day to do something in. Wow, the faith you have in me blows me away. That's vernacular, obviously, modern language for it.
Still, yeah.
But the Hebrew is very clear about that. Rabba emunatecha, how amazing is your faith in me that you have given me today to do something. And so you go from that, and then the next prayer is, God, the soul you put inside me, it's pure. And, all of these wonderful things about life and about me, not because I've got a big head and because I can't do ugly things, but I'm invited to be my best person today because today is a day that you have given me. So that's the Jewish take on the day. And we come in on Friday night, and our prayers are, thank you, God, for giving us Shabbat. Thank you, God, for the blessings in our life. Just a gratitude and a very positive thing. We don't spend much time dealing with sin. Yeah, we know that people are going to make mistakes. That's the whole point of the Garden of Eden story, is to show that people are designed to disobey. And guess what? When you disobey, you have the consequences to deal with. We're all responsible for our actions. And I know that you can dig through the old Ask a Rabbis and find the story of the Garden of Eden. I've talked about it many times. And the point of that is that we are given free will. We can disobey. It's not God twisting and pulling our strings, because if that was the case, then why bother with life? And life certainly wants to continue. And so that's the Jewish thing. And it was really brought home to me in Tucson. We had advertised, must have been in fall, because it was talking about the first, I think it was the first Friday after Sukkot, which is Shabbat Bereshit, where we start Scripture over again. And the topic, in those days we used to actually advertise the sermon topic to the community, and anybody was invited to come into services. That's still true. Anybody's invited to come into our services. And we do ask that you be vaccinated and wear a mask. That's a COVID reality. And excuse me, live radio. So it was talking about the creation of the world, and the title of that sermon was, is it creative design? Or is it, that's not the right words, but, did God design the world, and why is the world designed, and how did God create the world? And is there a conflict between science? I don't remember the exact
Speaking something into existence.
Yeah, well, the whole idea, was it 6 days of creation and 1 of resting, and what does that really mean?
But if a day is same as 1,000 years, and you've heard the one...
Probably closer to billions of years, but that's okay.
Oh, yes. When it comes to when we've looked back and seen what we've got to work with, wow, the Earth's been here a long time, and so have humans.
Mm-hmm.
Longer than we want to admit, I think.
Well, to me, there's no problem because there's no way to measure a day when the sun, moon, and stars are not created until Wednesday. So,
Oh, wow.
yeah, how are you going to measure it? You
Yeah.
don't exactly have a chronograph. You don't have a Timex watch or...
Without form and void. Now, that means spherical or not non-spherical? Without form.
Without form, it's not going to be spherical. It's
That's
just,
right. Yeah, okay.
just a mass.
Maybe flat like a frisbee.
I don't know. I tend to think of like a cloud, but who knows?
Well, yeah.
You and I were not there, and if we
No.
were, we'd be part of that cloud or fuzz or whatever it was. Without form, without tohu vavohu, with chaos and jumbled and
Yeah.
whatever that means.
Wow. I think we've kind of learned a little here and there about that. Yeah.
Yep. All right. So anyway, back to, and now I've lost my train again. This is not going to go down as one of those good Ask a Rabbi. Sorry about that,
we can
folks.
always go back to the original topic.
Well, we were
the
talking about
celebration.
Purim.
Yeah, Purim.
Right. So anyway, no, I was talking about the time in Tucson when we were doing this sermon, whose title seemed to have taken us down this rabbit hole. And so I was talking with some folks who were not members of the congregation who had come to see the creationism or whatever it was that the topic of that sermon was. And as we're gathering and getting ready to go into the seats and start the service, the man turns to the woman and says, "Come, let's go get a seat before all these other sinners grab one." And Judaism doesn't we don't call each other sinners. We call each other humans. We're perfectly human. We are designed to have free will, and the consequence of free will is that we will make mistakes. In fact, it is from our mistakes that we learn most powerfully when we choose to learn. When experience is the ability to recognize your mistake the second, third, or fourth time you make it. And so let's
it
go
works. It
let's go
helps.
into the Purim story. Purim, of course, being in the book of Esther, named for Queen Esther, whose other name is Hadassah, which means myrtle. And yes, that's a definite reference to the myrtle of Venus. And she is that kind of a character. So there's a blending of a little bit, kind of like the original song behind the Star-Spangled Banner, the melody, the
Oh,
Ode
yeah.
to Anacreon.
Yeah, that was a drinking song in England, wasn't it?
And one of the lines in there is, and you like me, I shall teach you to entwine the myrtle of Venus with Bacchus's vine.
Oh.
Yeah. It's worth getting the words out. And,
Ooh, yeah.
Francis Scott Key did select that melody for the Star-Spangled Banner when he wrote it, and we really do need to restrict that down to one stanza.
Something we should cancel culture on, huh?
Well, if the
Not
first
necessarily.
verse of that is pretty okay. It gets not so good as it goes on into the poem that he wrote.
Ooh.
Some of our founding fathers were not built on some of the things that we have come to recognize are important.
So when we
Important
start
things.
a sports event, we sing the national anthem, and we're actually singing the theme to something else from years before.
Well, it was common, and it still is, to take popular melodies and put different words to them.
Yeah.
In fact, a lot of one of my favorite Purim songs is "Jump in the Line," the melody, but it's used wonderful thing by Liz Citrin, rather. She does a great job of singing a Purim parody to that melody. Parodies are not new. Stealing melodies is not new. And that's why God Bless America counts an awful lot like God Bless the Queen. Melodies were shared. People knew melodies, and so you could put any words to them that you wanted. Still done today. It's actually one of the things that I enjoy doing is writing parodies for that. And I've done that for Purim, to take popular melodies and write other words into it. So let's flip back into the story of Purim, because, a 6-month drinking party, and then the king asks the queen, or sends eunuchs, sends who and whatever that gender was. Folks, you can read the story and figure it out, to go get Queen Vashti and bring her wearing her crown. And we don't, the popular story around that is that she's supposed to come naked, just wearing the crown.
Oh.
It really doesn't matter. Who wants to come into a group of men who've been drinking for 6 months
Oh my!
and do anything? You know, the
That
odds
would've
of
been a disaster at some
it
point.
would have been a disaster.
Wow.
And she very smartly says no, and the quote unquote wise men of the king tell him that she should be banished for disobeying. And they issue a rule that in all of Persia, the 127 provinces that were under King Ahasuerus, each one in their own language, that each man should rule his house and be in charge of it. And that brings up the question of, if you have to issue a law like that, what is that telling you about the reality of what's going on? Clearly, that's not the case.
I'm
Right?
sure the English language has nothing to do with this whatsoever, but it was a 6-month drinking party called Purim, like
No, it's
Purim.
not called Purim. Purim actually stands for, the word Pur means lots. And it's because the villain in the story, Haman or Haman, chooses lots for the day to kill the Jews. And so, you know, it's all about drinking and chances, and obviously sex plays in there. Not as much as you might think. The story of Purim is very similar to the story of 1,000 Nights in Scheherazade. In fact, the 1,000 Nights in the Night of the King is based on the Purim story, because after the king gets mad at Vashti and banishes her, whatever that means in those days, you can decide. The text actually leaves it very vague. And then the king is lonely because now he can't have his favorite wife come and be by his side, because she's the queen. Only one of his wives is the queen. And so then a search is made, taking all of the virgins of marrying age and collecting them into the house of preparation, where each woman is given basically a year to prepare for a night with the king. Times are really interesting. She gets 6 months of oils and perfumes and 6 months of preparation for whatever it is that the keeper of women will teach her to do and use, etc. And different women try different things, and everybody gets one night with the king. And after that night, she goes to the other house, the harem house, and she can only come out of it if the king calls for her by name.
Oh.
So, yeah.
He remembers her name.
If he remembers her name,
Yeah,
if it's
okay.
that memorable a night. And when Esther goes, the text is clear that she follows the advice of the folks who are taking care of the women and teaching them what to do. And she takes only those things that they tell her to take. In particular, Haggai, the keeper of women. And the king falls in love with her, and she becomes the queen of Persia, and hides the fact that she's Jewish,
Oh.
because that probably was just not a big detail as you're going through the night with the king. And in any event, she becomes queen, and everybody's happy because now there's a queen of Persia to go with King Ahasuerus. And even so, even though she's the queen, it's clear that there's long periods of time where they don't get together. Because as the story unfolds, Haman and Mordecai is Esther's uncle, and he's actually an unsung hero of the king, because he saves the king's life. He is a speaker of many languages, and he overhears some of the palace guards plotting to kill the king. And he reports that through Esther to the king, and the king, checks and finds out it's true. And the plotters are collected up, and the king does nothing about it until later one night, when Haman, his second in command, who's upset that Mordecai won't bow to him, and it's not because Jews don't bow, but it's because Haman is an Agagite, and there's this long-standing Hatfields and McCoy thing between Judeans and Agagites. We talked a little bit about that last week. And so he won't bow down to him, and then Haman decides that he's going to kill all of the Jews in the kingdom. He tells the king there's a certain people who don't obey the laws, not telling him that the problem is this Hatfield-McCoy feud with his family. Not that that's right. That's one of the things that doesn't get picked up, which is that it's not okay to hate somebody because you hated their grandfather or their great-grandfather or worse. That's not okay. We need to start putting those things aside and start to live as one human race, because we are. We're a wonderfully diverse species, but we all have 23 sets of chromosomes in greater or lesser number, and that's a whole nother. That's in and of itself a separate discussion, a genetics discussion. But in any event, Haman picks the day to destroy the Jews, and Esther throws a series of drinking parties for the king and Haman before she reveals to the king that Haman is plotting to kill her because she is also Jewish. And, what king wants to have his queen beheaded by his vizier? Yeah. Not good.
Nope.
And, of course, the king who rules his castle says to her, "What do you want, Esther? Whatever you want, even to half of the kingdom, it's yours." So, yeah, he's clearly ruling his house. Full of topsy-turvy things in there, and lots of clues inside the book that it's not meant to be taken as testable facts. The gallows that Haman builds in his own backyard is 75 feet high. It's 50 cubits, and a cubit's roughly 1.5 feet. So, yeah, nobody's going to build a gallows 75 feet high. The average story in a building is 10 to 15 if you allow for floors and ceilings and high ceilings. So you're talking about a 10-story gallows. I don't think most gallows are built that high. You can't even see who's hung there. And the point of hanging somebody on a gallows is so that others, it's much like crucifixion, you want people to see the victim so they don't do what it is that the guilty person did. And so, yeah, the story is filled with hyperbole like that, and the language is comical in many places.
Oh, yeah.
It's a 10-chapter book, but the last chapter is all of 3 verses, so it's not a hard read. It's a good idea to actually read it and see what the story's about. And what are we supposed to do on Purim? We're supposed to hear all of the words of the Megillah. We're supposed to hear them all translated so that we understand them. And we are supposed to give to the poor and send meals, or shalach manot, lishloach manot, to send portions. And a portion includes, something to eat, something to drink, and a dessert to others. So those are the mitzvot of Purim. And actually, so is getting so drunk, so high that you can't tell the difference between a blessing and a curse.
Oh my.
Yeah, that one's a little bit of a problem, I think, because what does it mean when you get that smacked?
Wow.
That's a difficult thing, but it's a carnival kind of atmosphere in Jewish communities, and certainly in Israel. And one of the things that I miss from Israel, and I have a couple of them, are the cute little hammers that they use to hit people. They're not hammers; they're plastic little noisemaker things.
Like Maxwell's hammer.
I'm not sure what a Maxwell hammer is.
I think it was a Beatles song or something about bang bang Maxwell's silver hammer came down upon his head.
But it's not silver; it's usually plastic, and they've got little accordion type heads on them, and they squeak.
So I'm always trying to figure out origins of things. So
yeah,
not that one.
Not that one. So sorry about that. I missed that reference in the. I'm not that much of a Beatles trivia person.
No,
sorry about that, folks.
No, but I thought maybe the Maxwell thing had a connection somewhere, though.
It may. I don't know.
Sometimes there are some similarities. The English language is full of words that sound like other words.
That would be true.
Like the sun, S-U-N, and the sun, S-O-N.
Yeah, well, there's a limited number of sounds in any language.
It's a play with words, though, with us. We're just We're spoiled with our language. We butcher our language, don't we?
Some more than others, yes.
Oh, yeah.
The Brits would claim that we haven't spoken it in decades.
Right, well, yeah. Well, they speak everything eloquently. Every word is very carefully chosen, to speak that way.
Yeah, I was with one of my classes reviewing the movie Good Will Hunting with Matt Damon and Robin. Yeah.
Let's see. Robin Williams?
Yeah, Robin
Okay.
Williams. Robin Williams plays the psychologist in it.
Oh, yeah.
And it's an excellent movie. We were talking about, it was in my psychology class, we were talking about the psychology of Matt Damon's upbringing and the abuse that he suffers as a child and how that causes him to self-sabotage as he gets older. Because that's basically what he's doing in the movie.
Oh.
And Sean, the character, the psychologist, breaks through that self-destruction cycle and is able to help Damon, the character, the character Will Hunting, break through the cycle of self-destruction that he's on, and with that he goes and rides off into the sunset in his little jalopy of a car.
Wow.
And heads off to California to find the love of his life, who has gone to California, who went to Stanford. It's a great movie.
Yeah.
Lots of information, lots of good information in there. A little too much cursing, actually. And I understand why it's there. I wish it wasn't. And it was the class was older students, not children anymore. They're adults, adult learners. So we talked about the obscenity in it before we did the assignment, and so yeah, plenty of cleaned up obscenities in the Book of Esther as well. If we did that today, if Hollywood did it today, I'm sure it would have plenty of. Yeah. Well, there's a great line in there that says that the king invited all of his officers, both big and small. Not great and lesser, but big and small. And so, it doesn't take a lot of imagination to guess what they're talking about.
Uh-huh.
Purim, the adult festival cast as a fun time for kids. We definitely play on the costumes with kids, but adults are invited to wear costumes as well and to party and have a good time. It's Zman Simchatenu, the time of rejoicing. It's one of the Jewish holidays that does fall into the category of they tried to kill us, we won, let's eat.
They make a great name for a nightclub.
They tried to kill us, we won, let's eat. That's a long name.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe you could do something like, I don't know, play on Purim or play on Esther's name. Yeah. I don't think you'd want to call it Haman's dad.
No, it doesn't work like
Yeah,
that.
you don't want to name it for the villain. So it's an interesting story. It's well worth reading. It is important to go through it, I think, because of the ridicule. Right? Lessons are often taught by overly satirized situations.
Okay.
And Esther and Purim definitely fall into that category. And so, yeah. So it is said by the sages that even in a future wonderful time, the Messianic age, we'll talk about what that really is some other time because I've only got 9 minutes left in this episode. But when we get to that, we'll still do Purim just as we will always do Yom Kippur. Kippur, Purim. People talk about words being similar. Those two often play. It's part of the Jewish calendar. This is spring festival, if you will, spring break for Jews. And anyone else who wants to enjoy. Noisemakers, popular. One of the other instructions for the holiday is to blot out Haman's name when it's being read in the story.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
So if you're in the that's one of the things you do to keep the kids interested, is if they hear Haman's name, that they use their noisemakers and blot out the name. And they definitely know how to do that. It also serves to keep them awake while you're reading, because you read the entire text if you do it traditionally.
That's great, though. I mean, they get to really listen intently.
They do.
Yeah.
They do. And today, people often will cheer for Esther and Vashti, and they might cheer for Mordecai as well. Some of them even whinny for the horses in the story, because there are horses.
Wow.
Lots of interesting things. Horses, of course, in those days were a sign of wealth of the king.
Right.
If the king had, it's one of the things that the people are warned about, is that if you have kings, they will want horses. So think about that a minute, folks. Right. Horses, of course, were expensive even back then. They're very expensive today.
Like cars are today.
Like cars are.
Yeah. Wow.
Except you have to feed and care for them.
Oh, that too.
And so, so I haven't mentioned it, but you are always welcome to call in with a question to 772-340-1590. If you'd like to sponsor one of these Ask a Rabbi episodes, we'll talk about whatever you might want us to talk about and give you some plugs, those kinds of things. Please feel free to sponsor one or more episodes. Give a call to the radio station anytime. It's 772-340-1590. That will reach into the station, and you can ask for Greg or Carol.
Mm-hmm. Tell them you want to sponsor some of these
Ask a
Rabbi shows.
Yeah, that would be greatly appreciated.
Yeah.
And you're also obviously welcome to any of the things that we as a congregation do. We're going to be doing Third Friday in 2 more weeks. This is First Friday of March. And
next weekend is the second Sunday in March. That's when we spring forward with our clocks.
Oh, aren't we lucky?
Oh, we get to do that again. Wow.
I really, of all the things that Florida has asked the federal government to do to allow us to not jump backward and forward, I would so love that.
Yeah. Now, some states, they don't do that.
Arizona doesn't do it.
Doesn't?
Arizona doesn't do it. So right now we're 2 hours different from Arizona. After we go on daylight savings time, it'll be 3 hours. I don't really care what the difference is. It's just easier to not have to adjust my internal clock by that hour all the time.
I'd just be worried about it being nighttime in the middle of the day eventually.
I think that's a little bit of a slippery slope there, Cliff.
Could be, yeah. It would.
I don't think it'll be dark in the middle of the day. It might be dark when you first get up and have to.
Definitely different. So it's very.
It's going to be,
We weren't going back and forward.
It gives us more hours of daylight later in the day.
Yeah.
Arizona doesn't do it because it would move the hottest part of the day too late into the day.
Yeah.
And so it would be harder on people who can't afford air conditioning to go home.
Well, knowing how hot it is can make it worse for you. People who know, because I remember one time they said, don't say it's 104 degrees, say it's like 102. That way they won't have heat strokes out there. I said, what? Yeah, they wanted us to be careful about not to set off any heat strokes because of the knowledge of the temperature being so hot. I thought that was kind of crazy, but in a way, it makes a little bit of sense because people respond to things that they hear like that.
People do respond to what they hear. People tend to believe what they hear, unless given a reason not to. However, people also will usually go to what they heard first or more recently. Right?
Okay.
First hearing and last. And that's why you can remember things on your shopping list. Here's a little piece of practical stuff. Yeah. You can remember the first things on the list because they were the first things you put down. They're the most urgent. And then you remember the last things on your list because they have recency in your memory. We started the talk by talking about how imperfect our memories are, and that's definitely true. We tend to judge things against what we hear first and what we hear most recently. And we should really judge all things against logic. Plato said that, right? Logic should be in the driver's seat.
Logic makes sense.
It does, but we've become almost immune to being able to verify when things are fallacies. Fallacies are not the same as falsehoods. falsehoods are lies, and improper, and things are either true or false. A fallacy is about whether or not the logic is valid. A fallacy is invalid logic where the conclusion does not entail from the premises.
Wow.
So it's about your logic, and commercials and things like that will use fallacies to be humorous and to be memorable. They take it to an nth degree. There's a couple of insurance companies that do that, and DirecTV does it a lot too. So some different folks do that, and politicians will do it when they run out of real facts. In fact, most people will start to use fallacies when they run out of facts, because they've run out of facts, and so they'll try to take you down a different track, a different road. So fallacies are an interesting thing. We might devote one session to that. Folks, please feel free to contact me or contact the radio station. Let us know what you'd like me to talk about on one of these episodes. I'm open to suggestions. I'm also very open to sponsorship. So this is Rabbi Shafir Lobb, and Congregation Eitz Chayim is located across from Clover Park from Met Stadium, and we're on University Boulevard, 540 Northwest University Boulevard, Suite 102. It's the front building, and we're right next to the elevators and stairs in the front of that first building.
The plant sale.
Plant sale is always on fourth Sunday and the Monday after it. So that's a little ways away. We just had one last week, and we have one coming up in another. This is first Friday and first Sunday. So you've got 3 more weeks to go till we hit the next plant sale. But lots of other exciting things that you can do. We're also collecting sneakers. If you've got used sneakers, lightly used, heavily used, we are collecting those to be remade into playground matting.
Okay. All right.
So please consider contacting us with that. This is Rabbi Shafir Lobb, and it has been Ask a Rabbi. You can find the congregation at www.eitzchayim.org. Have a great Friday, a great weekend. God willing, see you next week.
With archives on YouTube, go to WPSLTV.com for Ask a Rabbi. And you can binge watch some of these shows if you like.
There you go.
And just a reminder, this is WPSL Port St. Lucie, the talk of the Treasure Coast, webcasted to the world on Google Home, Alexa, and TuneIn.